If we turn our backs and spit in his face, is God still gonna bless the USA?
I grew up in a sailor's home where profanity was just part of the air you breathed. Nobody thought much about it. You learned words before you even knew what they meant, and once you learned them, they're stuck. They became responsive reflexes to frustration, humor, surprise, or anger. Years later, after coming to Christ, I noticed something unsettling. Even when I wasn't speaking those words anymore, they echoed in my mind. They shaped my reactions. They colored my thoughts. Language leaves residue. It doesn't just pass through, it settles in. That's why Scripture takes our words so seriously. God understands that what we eventually say shapes who we become. Greetings, Patriots. I'm Perry Green. Welcome to God in America, where faith and freedom walk together under the authority of truth. Freedom of speech does not remove the responsibility of speech. God cares deeply about what comes out of our mouths because words shape hearts, homes, and nations. We often justify and overlook our bad behavior. Yet there are some things we should not take lightly because small issues can escalate into larger, more serious ones. Today, I want to begin a short 4-part series I'm calling Bad Habits of Good People. We'll begin with our speech. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 4, verse 29, "Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers." Notice what Paul does not say. He doesn't say, try to cut back. He doesn't say, tone it down. He says, let no corrupt word proceed. Words aren't neutral. They don't just express culture, they create it. Words either build something up or tear something down. Jesus made this even clearer when he said that words flow from the heart. In other words, when corrupt speech comes out, it reveals what's being stored inside. If our language is constantly harsh, crude, or destructive, it's worth asking what we've been feeding our hearts. The Bible consistently links speech to spiritual maturity. James compares the tongue to a ship's rudder. It is small, but powerful enough to steer the whole vessel. The book of Proverbs tells us that life and death are in the power of the tongue. That means our words don't just affect others, they shape us. What we repeatedly say becomes what we repeatedly think. What we repeatedly think becomes what we eventually believe, and belief shapes behavior. That's why God doesn't treat speech as a side issue. He treats it as a discipleship issue. The principle wasn't lost on America's founders. George Washington understood the moral weight of words. In August of 1776, after taking command of the Continental Army, Washington issued a general order condemning what he called the foolish and wicked practice of profane cursing and swearing. He wasn't trying to be pious, he was trying to build an army capable of sustaining liberty. Washington believed profanity weakened discipline, dishonored God, and eroded the moral character of the troops. He knew something modern America forgets. Liberty does not survive without moral restraint. Freedom without discipline eventually destroys itself. We live in a culture that celebrates offensive speech. Crude language is marketed as authenticity. Profanity is treated as honesty. Harshness is confused with strength. Years ago, men would not use coarse language in front of women or children. Today, quote-unquote ladies and youngsters drop the F-bombs with the same expertise as the most profane men of old. But Scripture tells us something radically different. Strength is measured by self-control, not by volume or vulgarity. If Christians speak no differently than the world, if our language tears down instead of builds up, then our witness is weakened no matter how correct our theology may be. Words spoken in anger linger. Words spoken carelessly wound deeply, but words spoken with wisdom and grace can heal, encourage, and redirect entire lives. Renouncing offensive speech isn't about trying to sound religious. It's about maturity. It's about choosing to speak in ways that strengthen homes, churches, friendships, and communities. Before we speak, we should ask, does this build up or tear down? Does this reflect Christ or simply vent emotion? Does this impart grace or spread damage? What comes out of your mouth should leave people better, not dirtier, stronger, not smaller. When Christians discipline their speech, they don't lose influence, they gain it. Words can belittle or build. Words can turn people to Christ or tear them away. God calls his people to choose carefully because our words reveal our hearts, shape our culture, and testify to our faith. As the salt of the earth, we're to add flavor, not distaste, in what we say. Well, thank you for listening to God in America today. Until next time, keep the light of pure speech burning.